This is Amplify You, the podcast about you discovering your message and broadcasting it to the world. If you're a coach, author, or speaker, you'll want to tune in. If you're looking for the best return on your time investment to get your message out to the world in a bigger way, we're giving you full access and behind the scenes look of how we're running our podcast, how our clients have found success, and what you can do to launch your podcast today. The world needs your message. I'm Michelle Abraham, the host. Join my family as we unleash your unique genius and find the connections you need to launch your adventure today. Join us and let's get amplified. Hey, Amplify You family. Michelle Abraham here, your host. This is a behind the mic interview with host of the Urban Farm podcast, Greg Peterson. Greg, how are you today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Good.
Love sharing about this.
Absolutely. Well, we met recently at one of our challenges for our podcast sales machine. And I was very inspired to hear about your podcast that you've had going for 6 years, which is awesome. Had over 3.2 million downloads to your podcast. So holy cow, that is like a strive, that a lot of people, first of all, 6 years is like an ancient time in podcasting time. So that means like you've kept consistent and kept going for 6 years, which is incredible. So congratulations on that. And to reach over not just 1 million downloads, but 3.2 million downloads is also an amazing feat. So tell us about your show. How did it get started? What was your vision with it?
Really, my vision with it is to share with my listeners people's stories about gardening, from small to large. And what I do is it's two parts. There's 2 parts to the podcast. There's the interview part, and then there's the questions part. And in the interview part, what I do is I get the guests sharing about what's their heart work. What are they doing here? Why do they do it? And it really just tells their story. Basically it's their origin story. Like, how did this happen? And I've had people on the podcast from rock stars. Literally, Jason Mraz was on my podcast.
I love Jason Mraz. He's cool.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah. He is an avocado and coffee farmer in San Diego County, by the way.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
I knew he was cool.
Yeah, all the way down to Joe and Susie Backyard Gardener. And, and that breadth between them is really important, so that people can, they can say, all right, well, I can go do rock star work like, all these guys are doing, or I can just get started. Yeah. And it shares their successes and failures. And then the second part of my podcast interview is 5 questions. And the first question, in my opinion, is probably the most important question. And I ask people, tell me about a time you failed and what you learned from it. Because when you're starting to grow things, you're going to fail.
Yeah. You have to be okay with failing, right?
And you have to be okay with failing, because that's where we
fail forward.
Right. And that's where we learn things. I mean, think about it. Those people in the world that never fail, there's not a whole lot of work that they've done in the world. Right. People that fail a lot generally do a lot more work in the world. They're just because they're not afraid to step out. And the reason that question came to be is because in 2004, I started a business. 2003, I started a business. And it was go big or go home was really my attitude back then, which was the death knell of that business, is that I went big or went home. I went big and didn't go home. And in retrospect, I lost about 80 grand on it. And in retrospect, it was, well, I didn't really want to be in that business in the first place. So that was a good thing for me. What I would have loved to have done is, rather than starting out at 80,000 plants the first season, start out at 8,000 plants. I would have lost less money. And at the same time, I could have probably learned the same lesson. So that's really where that question comes from, is, to showcase to people, it's okay to not get it right every time. And then I follow it up exactly then with the next question of, tell me about your biggest success.
Cool.
So they can, okay, this is where I failed, but this is where I succeeded. And then the next question is, what is your big why? Why do you do what you do? And this gives them an opportunity to, it's about my kids. For me, I never had kids, but it's about the kids.
Yeah, lots
about
of client kids.
Yeah, about the future generations. What are we leaving the future generations? Okay. That has, I've never wanted kids, but that has always been in my mind. What are we doing as a culture to nurture the future generation of kids that are coming? And so we get all kinds of, stories about what their big why is. And then I ask them to share a book title, primarily because I'm always looking for good books to read. And then I ask them for a piece of advice. And so that's usually the podcasts are somewhere between 25 minutes and 45 minutes. I just let them go until they conclude themselves. And I've had, like I said, I had Jason Mraz on. I've had David Holmgren, who was the co-founder of Permaculture. This guy's an international rock star in the permaculture arena. Permaculture, I like to call the art and science of working with nature. And Joel Salatin, who's is a rock star in farming. And what I do with them, I don't limit them. If I get an opportunity to talk to them, I just let them talk. And, Joel, all three of the people that I mentioned, I got 2 or 3 episodes out of their conversation because I just let them go.
Yeah,
I just let them go.
Curious, what do you do with those 5 questions that you ask at the end of every interview? Have you made them into like a book or turned them into something? Like, have you taken those and extrapolated them and like made something with them? I think that would be so cool after 700 people being asked those questions. There's got to be some really cool content in there.
Oh my gosh, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. Like even this, like each of those questions on their own could be an own book, like asking 700 people, like what is your why? Like, oh, crazy, right? Think of like the chicken soup for the soul book series, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
For the farmer's soul. Yeah. So cool. Anyways, it's not to give you some more work to do, but that was just something I was curious
about.
That's
a great idea. That's a great idea. Thank you. One of the things, so I had a podcast prior to this. It was called Freshly Green. It was in 2006. We did 40 episodes, almost a year's worth of episodes. And I also was, when I went back to college, I went to the farmer's market. I was actually harvesting food out of my front and backyard, and I was going to the farmer's market. And one of the things that I learned in both of those cases was that if I wasn't consistent at the farmer's market, or if I wasn't consistent with my podcast, I'd lose people the next week.
Interesting.
And so when I started the Urban Farm podcast in 2015, so actually I think we're coming up on 7 years.
I was going to say you've been doing it as long as my daughter's been alive.
Oh, there you go. And we signed up for John Lee Dumas's a Podcaster's Paradise course. I think it was, I don't know, $1,500 or whatever. I am a lifelong learner, and for me, it's really important to engage with people that are better at something than I am. And if they have something to offer me, it's like, oh, tell me, what do you got? And one of the big takeaways from Podcaster's Paradise was be consistent. For the first 3 years of our podcast, we put out 3 episodes a week.
Wow,
that's a lot of work.
Lot of content.
That's a lot of work. And for the balance of the last 3.5 years, we've been putting out 1 episode a week, which is actually much more doable.
Right. More sustainable. Yeah.
Much more sustainable. And we have never missed a podcast episode.
Wow, that's incredible.
Never missed a podcast, and we've never missed they've all been new.
Yeah.
We've never gone back and pulled one of the old ones.
Replayed any extras. Yeah, that's amazing. So what do you think has been the success of your show? Do you think that like obviously over 3 million downloads, you got some listeners. So What is it about your show that you think has drawn so many listeners to it?
The format, for sure, because it's storytelling. Bottom line is, this is storytelling. I bring people on and I let them tell their stories, and I let them tell their stories. I don't, in a interview like this, I might have, in a 45-minute interview, I might be talking for 7 minutes, maybe. So I let them tell their stories, and I find guests that have done cool things, whether it's Joe, backyard gardener, doing a cool thing in his neighborhood or in his backyard, or whether it's, rock stars of the world. Yeah. And people like hearing stories.
For sure. Yeah.
People like hearing stories. So I think that's a big piece. As I mentioned earlier, the consistency piece is really important.
Huge. Yeah.
Huge. Yeah. Don't miss an episode. And part of how I do that, John Lee Dumas taught me this as well. I batch them. I do batches. All like the first week of August, we're going to record for the next 3 months.
Cool. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of batching too. I'm new to batching, just the last year or so that I've been doing it. But this is my 7th interview today. So I'm doing batching because I'm doing 2 different podcasts, but we're doing batching once a month. Covers me for both podcasts for the month.
Right.
So
Perfect.
Yeah, it's good. It's really, so I am enjoying it because I'm in the flow of it. It's just my podcasting day. You get to talk to a bunch of cool people. You're in the flow of it. I really love the batching thing. It's it's much easier to do that than to interrupt your day to go do a podcast interview, then go do sales, or then go do something else. And it's all in one day. It's really cool. Yeah. And that way, you can take breaks, right? So we had a lot of clients earlier this summer that wanted to take the summer off. And I was like, great, take the summer off, but batch all your episodes in March, April, May, so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming and your podcast doesn't lose that momentum, because we've seen it over and over, the charts just go from listeners to here after even a week or 2 of missing a show.
Yep.
All that hard work goes down, you lose your listeners' trust. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. That is huge.
Yeah. So great
plus it takes all this energy to get things rolling.
Yeah.
And if you take some time off, the energy kind of declines.
Good. It's hard.
And then it takes a lot more energy to get it back rolling again.
Right. Absolutely. So for our podcast listeners listening right now that are at home still thinking about podcasting or thinking this might be a thing for them, what is something that you wish you knew now that you wish you'd known back when you got started?
I'm going to say the way that I talk to people. Interviewing people is a bit of an art. And I listened to probably 2 years of podcasts, and more specifically, John Lee Dumas, JLD, over at Entrepreneur on Fire, to see how he was interacting with people. I have been on episodes, I've been in interviews where I was being interviewed and I had to drive the interview.
Right.
I have a very specific script that we use that drives the interview so that I don't have to think about that. And then I have a team that helps me get the person that I'm interviewing set up so that when they step into the interview of the podcast, we both know what's going on. Okay. And we both know how it's going to go. And so I start it by reading the bio that I have for him. I say, you know what? I'm going to read your bio here, make sure I got it right. And that starts the conversation going. And I've had some people on my podcast that are harder, they got to pull harder to get it out of them. And other people that, it's like, go, and they're gone. They're, not gone bad, but they're off to the races. So
you don't have to say another word for another half an hour, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that people, specifically a lot of people that you're interviewing around urban gardening or urban farming, aren't used to being on podcasts? So is that something that you had to kind of get used to, educating your listeners or educating your guests on how to show up on a podcast?
We have a very specific system set up. when I find somebody I want to have on my podcast, I send them a link. Mm-hmm. They sign it, they pick a time and date. And at the same time, they're told that they're going to have a conversation with Janice, my manager, for 15 minutes before the date of their podcast.
Got it.
So I'm getting, and that's usually 2 or 3 days beforehand, I'm getting people that are already prepped.
Right.
When we step into the interview, which it makes all the difference in the world.
They know what they're doing. They're not new to podcasting. They have a microphone.
Right. Exactly.
All the things,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that helps a lot. And, sometimes people are a little nervous.
Yeah.
And especially the ones that are starstruck. Mm-hmm. I was at an event a week after I moved to Asheville. It was a plant sale. I walked into this booth. I had my shirt on, and this guy in a worm booth, a worm composting booth, looks at me, looks at my shirt, and he said, "Oh my God, you're Greg Peterson. I listen to your podcast all the time."
That's awesome.
Right? And so we had a conversation. I got a hug, and his dad was excited to meet me, and his wife was excited to meet me. And then I invited him to be on the podcast.
Oh, that's so cool. That must have been so huge for him.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And he has a story to tell, though. He started a worm composting business 4 years ago.
Wow.
Out of nothing, out of the air. He'd never gardened. He'd never done any of this. And he started this business. What a great story to tell.
Yeah.
So when he arrives, I already knew from Janice that he was a little nervous. So I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes on the phone with him saying, you know what, this is just a conversation between you and me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Right? It's a conversation that we're gonna have, and we're just friends. We're gonna just chat, and you're gonna tell me your story. And here's the thing: once people start telling their story, good luck turning them off.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. People love talking about themselves.
Because it's their story.
Yeah.
It's how they did what they did. How exciting is that?
Right. Yeah.
So
cool. Oh, I love it. Those are so great, Greg. And thank you so much for sharing them with us today. Hey, if our listeners want to find out more about you, obviously we'll send them to urbanfarmpodcast.com. And there, tell them what else you've got going on over there.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so the urbanfarm.org is my website, and Urban Farm Podcast lands there. And we give online courses. We have monthly chats that we do. I have in Phoenix, I have a Urban Farm fruit tree program that I've run for the past 22 years that even living in Asheville, we still run that. So there's all kinds of information on how to grow food, how to garden.
That's awesome. So cool. So if you guys that piques your interest, go head on over to urbanfarm.org. Check out what Greg's up to, and definitely tune into his podcast, give him a review, and tell him that you've given him a review. You heard him on the Amplify You podcast, right? That makes podcasters' hearts sing. So make sure you head on over there, give him a great review. And Greg, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much for being on Amplify You today. And love this behind the mic interview. It's been cool.
Right back at you.
Awesome. All right, Amplify You family, go out there, have a fabulous day. We'll see you again next week.